Well, good morning, everybody. It's Friday, and I haven't yet come up with a better name for Friday, so we're still sticking with that. But today we're going to be in another episode of Creative Differences, and we're going to be juxtaposing the mechanics of traditional role-play games, Dungeons & Dragons in particular, and then a new element or a new methodology for looking at those actions in terms of the way Nycos RPG handles it. We're going to be looking, of course, primarily and initially at combat. Then we're going to talk about a conflict, a contest, a challenge, and a check, and just show how these terms more broadly define the elements of action in a role-play game in ways that make the game feel more cinematic. And one of the reasons why in the Nycos mechanism we refer to the director of the games event instead of calling that person a dungeon master. But having said that, welcome to the show. If you haven't been here before, we greatly appreciate you being here with us and invite you to stay with us and return every opportunity. If you have not watched one of our episodes before, I will say that my speech pattern is probably a bit slower than the rapid pattern that the world seems to be focusing on. So I recognize that may be somewhat of a downer, but I think you'll see that the reason for deliberation is to make sure that I'm conveying the information I want to convey as clearly as possible. Alrighty, so when we talk about essential elements of actions, when you are playing a role-play game, it comes down to where is the playfulness? Is the play the verbal interaction between the players? Is it the verbal interaction between the players and the game master? Where is the play of it? And to many people's minds, the play of the game really comes down to the combat scenes within a game, because these are the places where the actions have the greatest ramifications. In theory, at least, you've considered that if I am fighting against a big monster, then that must be the important point of the story. And maybe I'll change your mind, maybe I won't, but hopefully I will at least create a dialogue and give us an opportunity to talk about it. If you happen upon the channel and want to be a participant, just make sure you catch us. We start every episode at 10 a.m. Monday through Friday and 11 p.m. Monday through Friday, all Pacific time. And I would love to have this as a conversation rather than as a monologue, but such as it is, this is what we have to work with. So let's get going, shall we? So, combat does make up I wouldn't say it's the largest percentage, but it is considered to be the most exciting portion of roleplay games, particularly Dungeons & Dragons, because the system is leveraged to where combat is the most important aspect. It is the primary way in which a player earns experience for their persona to advance, their character to advance in the story. And it's also the kind of the culmination of the scenes that led up to it. Most game masters endeavor to put the big bad at the last scene so that there is a build up to the excitement of it, and then they're able to, in essence, provide the players with the satisfactory crescendo of action to when the monster is finally destroyed or whatever. And while that is an essential part of storytelling, you have to be able to resolve those kind of conflicts and the combat scenes effectively and arguably cinematically, so that the players feel the excitement of that moment. It plays a far smaller portion of the story if the story is greater than just the fight. So for the example of our conversation, if I'm running a Dungeons and Dragons module, and the Dungeons and Dragons module ends with the defeat of the dragon, then that is the final scene. Fundamentally, there's no reason to play beyond that, because that's what we came here to do. Yes, there is some Schadenfreude where the players want to appreciate and enjoy the moment of defeat of the villain because they've worked so hard to get to that point. And so there are occasions to have a celebratory party or whatever after, and give the players an opportunity to benefit from the successes they've had. But for most, the most memorable scene or most memorable part of the entire adventure was the combat. But that, I don't suppose, would be a really justifiable reason to extend the amount of time it takes to play through. And if you look at, as we've talked about before, the conundrum of the hit point pool, the higher the level of the adventurers, the longer the conflict will take, and the arguably less enjoyable it becomes, because it develops into a Pebbles and Bam Bam, Punch and Judy kind of I hit you, you hit me, I hit you kind of environment that makes the conflict unsatisfactory. So, in juxtaposition, Dungeons and Dragons' methodology leaves you having to literally obliterate 100% of the points of the villain. Generally speaking, there are some asterisks that could be put on that. There are times when a magic effect does the deed and ends the combat before the hit point pool is fully expended, but the very mechanism isn't built that way. The mechanism is built for the hit point pool to be really the objective. And with the Nycos RPG mechanism, you have clear winner, clear loser defined in an instant rather than over a long duration, providing the opportunity for the fight scenes to have a panoply of outcomes. You certainly can defeat the monster can defeat you, but perhaps the destruction or the end of the scene doesn't have to be the termination. Perhaps there's an opportunity to speak to the creature. If it's completely feral, perhaps there's an opportunity to capture it, to cow it, to allow for other alternative endings for the fight other than the obliteration of one or the other of the opposing forces. The very process of combat even feels more cinematic when you are describing how your success applies versus how their success applies, or how the conditions are imposed upon the defender in the case of Nycos RPG. This more cinematic approach or more theatrical approach allows, literally, you can drive the monster off the cliff. You don't actually have to be the one who does this final blow. You simply utilize the conditional response. Even if all players in the scene are absolutely competent, the variance between levels of success allow for the dynamic transitions within the scene to play out, so that the visualization of what's going on becomes much more clear. It's not simply I hit or I miss. This also applies to the concepts of conflict. When I utilize the term conflict here, that is where you've got two or more opposing forces that are utilizing different skills but trying to resolve a singular event. So, for example, the villain has been caught red-handed on scene and decides to flee. Then the personas, the characters, then chase. And so their skill in chasing is compared against his skill at hiding. And escaping. And so therefore the conflict is still partial success versus full success versus complete, wild success. And so therefore the very flow of the conflict can be felt in the relative positioning of the dice rolls in terms of value. So the greater the value gains certain perspective or certain benefits. The concept of doing this also applies to contests, and contests are in those situations where both individuals are doing the same thing, but they are either in a race or they're trying to do something more or better or faster than an opponent, and therefore the skills checks still are giving relative positioning to one another, showing as one accelerates above the other, or one, as they vie for equity as they move forward. Now, when it comes to dealing with challenges or conflicts in challenges or checks, the mechanism of partial kind of falls by the wayside, because either you unlocked the door or you didn't unlock the door. But utilizing the partial as indicative instead of how long it takes, a wild success gets the door open easily. A partial means it took a considerable amount of time longer. This allows for a more nuanced result than just simply, well, yeah, you've unlocked it. No, you didn't. Furthermore, it gives more of the feel of having to use additional resources. So, for example, in the picking of a lock, perhaps your tool set was jiggled loose or whatever, and so therefore there's an explanation that can be generated for why it took longer, and that can be replicated in the scenes to allow the players to visualize what's going on. And I think when I'm referring to the essentials of actions, all of these play into what are the critical scenes in an encounter or in an adventure. And I think what the difference in dynamics does is it puts more emphasis on the scenes that were essential in setting up the final conflict, so that wow, my lights are going crazy today. I never noticed that the very actions that one takes early on can influence the outcome, and therefore even adjust in advance of the final scene those pieces that fit into it. So taking into account that you're wanting to be able to use your advantage against the opponent, actually choosing a battleground where they have places for you to insult additional conditions, like making sure the ground is completely covered with water so it's slippery, or making sure to throw out some caltrops to make sure that if they step off the path, it's going to be more difficult for them. These are ways that the adventure group can change and modify the final scene before it actually happens, and these nuances would be lost in a standard roleplay game because it's simply hit or miss and track damage. Whereas this methodology would allow you to set the conditions so that you can drive an opponent into those places and cause those additional detriments to them. These opportunities give the game you're playing, the scene you're creating, a lot more life and more dynamics, and I think you'll find the players will be drawn to this kind of a scene over a flat hit miss mechanic. Well, I intended to have a lot more to talk about, but it always seems that when I have a zero audience, I just ramble, and so we're done. So I will be back on at 11 p.m. tonight, and I promise to have a much longer show, and I will talk to you then.